Just a little bit about me. Evan mentioned I am originally from India. I lived in India for 22 years and moved to the United States 1997, and I've lived here since then. And Hindi is one of the languages I speak. So when Matthew approached me about this and said, "Would you like to do one of the languages?" and I had to choose which one I was most comfortable with, so I chose Hindi. But I also speak Tamil and Telugu, but I'm a little less comfortable with those. So that's a little bit about me. I work for Unbound as the International Program Director for Asia and Africa programs. Before we get started, I wanted to ask if are there things you already know about Hindi, the Hindi language, that maybe interested you or wanted you to get involved in this event tonight? Just anything, whether it's Bollywood, or are there things that you already know about the language?
Yes, this is Shahid. I know the language. Uh, it's almost like the same Urdu and Hindi in the subcontinent.
Mm-hmm.
Most of the
Right,
Bollywood movies are the same.
right. So if you speak Urdu, you understand Hindi.
That's correct.
So yeah, that's one of the things I'm gonna touch on as well. So just a little bit of history. Hindi gets its name from the Persian word Hind, which means the land of the Indus River. And it is basically the language of the land of the Indus River, which is what India is. It was designated the national language of India, but it's actually really one of 22 officially recognized languages in India. And there are many dialects of Hindi. So what is considered Khari Boli, which is like the pure Hindi, is spoken in only like a small portion of India, but there are several different dialects of Hindi that are spoken all over northern India. It is spoken by nearly about 500,000 people as a first language. And it's also spoken in Nepal, Mauritius, Fiji, Suriname, Guyana, and Trinidad and Tobago. In a couple of these places, actually, Mauritius and Fiji, they are considered official languages as well. As Shahid mentioned, it has a relationship to other languages. It belongs to the Indo-European family of languages. It's a direct descendant of the Sanskrit language, which a lot of other Indian languages descended from Sanskrit as well. Let me go ahead and shut my door. I have my 5-year-old. I can hear him screaming right now. So sorry about that. These are the perils of working from home. It has been influenced and enriched by languages like Turkish, Persian, Arabic, Portuguese, and English as well, and as well as other Indian Dravidian languages. And what I mean by Dravidian languages are the South Indian languages that are Tamil, Telugu, Kannada, and Malayalam, which have a different script than the Devanagari script, which I will show you in just a second. As Shahid mentioned, Hindi speakers can also speak Urdu, but they cannot read it for the most part unless they actually learned how to read Urdu. I can read Hindi, but I cannot read Urdu because Urdu uses the Arabic script. Several Hindi words have made their way into the English language, including words that you're probably aware of, such as loot, bungalow, jungle, thug. It's not one of my favorite words, but they have made their way into the English language as well. The script that is used for Hindi is actually called the Devanagari script. It means, Deva means the god, and Nagari means of urban origin in the Sanskrit language. And it really dates back to the 5th century BCE. The alphabet contains 13 vowels and 33 consonants. And instead of me trying to speak the alphabet, I'm going to try to play this video for you just briefly. I'm not going to play the whole video, but just a little bit.
See, Jude is helping.
So those are the vowels. So that is the sort of the alphabet that the first part of it where she said e, u. Those are sort of the vowel sounds that you probably recognize from English or other languages as well. But when you start getting into like ka, ga, those are the consonant sounds. So it has, the alphabet actually contains 13 vowels and 33 consonants. And I'm a traditionalist. If you ask certain, there is a modified version of Hindi where the modernists will say it's actually 11 vowels and 31 consonants. But I was taught in the old way, so I still believe that it's like 13 vowels and 33 consonants. So that's kind of like where I fall as far as the Hindi language goes. It is a very phonetic language. So so the way the letters are written are the way they're read. So this right here is a, the vowel a, and this is ja. So when you put them together, it makes aj, ja, aj, which means today. Aj. Did you notice anything peculiar about the alphabet or the script? Anybody?
Pritha, I've always liked the bar that goes through the letters.
Yeah. So I was hoping somebody would say that, because that's the horizontal line above the letters is what connects the letters and makes them a word. So without that, those are just kind of letters floating by themselves. So this, without the connecting line, would just be two separate, a vowel and a consonant, ja. But if you put them together and you put the line connecting them, that makes the word aj, today. Some unique aspects of the language, as I already mentioned, it is read as it is written. So there's a joke in Hindi that, in the English language, TO is two, but, that's a bad example. PUT is put, but BUT is but. But in Hindi, it's written the way it's pronounced the way it's written. There is no confusion about what the vowel means or what it's supposed to be pronounced like. So that's one of the unique concepts of it. All nouns have a gender. And just like Spanish, it's sometimes but not always marked by a vowel ending. For example, the word for room, kamra, is masculine, but so is man, which is admi. Admi doesn't necessarily mean, because it ends with the E, is going to be a female noun. And the same goes, the other example for that, mithai, sweet, is feminine, but so is bird, chidiya, which ends with the A. A lot of times the A would be a male and the E would be a female, but not always. It's like kind of like Spanish, where you have those exceptions. And so, but all nouns do have a gender. Another unique aspect of Hindi is that there are no articles in Hindi. There is no equivalent for a, the, or an. The sentence structure is also different. The noun is always at the beginning of the sentence, and the verbs go at the end of the sentence. For example, the sentence, the girl is running, in Hindi would be, ladki bhag rahi hai. Again, there's no word for the. It literally translates to girl running is. Ladki is girl. Bhag rahi is running. Hai is. So the noun comes in the beginning and the verb comes at the end, and there's no article. So it's kind of like Matthew asked me to make sure that I have like some basic concepts, so we're not getting into too much of the details of the grammar. So that's kind of some of the basic concepts. There are formal and informal words in Hindi. So if you're familiar with Spanish, for instance, you have a tu and a usted. There's a similar structure in Hindi where you can be aap, which is more respectful, tum, which is a little less respectful, and then tu, which is what I would probably use to very close friends. So if I'm speaking to somebody that's older than me, I would probably say, aap kaise hain? How are you? But if I'm talking to somebody that's maybe an acquaintance that I don't know very well, but I still feel a little, maybe my age range, I would probably say, tum kaise ho? But if it's a really good friend that I've known since childhood, I probably say, tu kaisi hai or tu kaisa hai. So it's important to use sort of the right formal and informal form so you don't inadvertently offend somebody. And the same, and I didn't put this in sort of the PowerPoint, but it's a similar concept for even words like father. So father would be pita in Hindi. But there's an informal word for it, which is like baap. But you don't want to ask somebody, aapka baap kaisa hai? That would be disrespectful. You want to say, aapke pita kaise hain? So it's a more formal way of inquiring about the father of that person. Familial relationships is another one that's kind of unique in Hindi. They're very specific and it can be determined by the word that's used. Uncle can be chacha, which is dad's younger brother, or mama, which is the maternal uncle, or tau, which is the dad's older brother. So the generic word uncle now becomes very specific when you use these specific words they actually determine what the, I'm sorry about that. Let me give a second to my 5-year-old. And then I'm going to kind of end with some basic phrases. If you've ever taken a yoga class, you probably know the phrase namaste, which basically means hello, but a deeper meaning for it is the light in me bows to the light in you. Please would be kripya. Thank you is dhanyavad. Yes is haan. Yes with respect is hanji. Ji is sort of like the suffix that you use. So let's say if I were to address Shahid, I would say Shahid Ji, which would be the equivalent of Mr. Shahid, but with an added level of respect. Or Matthew G, which would be giving Matthew that extra level of respect. It's equivalent of Mr., but just like a little more. No is nahi. How are you? Aap kaise hain? Formal. And tum kaise ho is informal. I'm fine, thank you is main theek hu. Dhanyavad. So those are kind of like, I just put like a high level overview together. It's barely scratching the surface of Hindi. But the beauty of Hindi is that once you have the alphabet, the vowels and the consonants together, it's really easy to read the language. So it is not as complicated as some of the other languages like Tamil or Telugu. From my perspective, it's easy to read the script as compared to when you look at some of the Dravidian scripts that get really complicated with the number of dots and the lines that you use to designate whether it's a plural or a singular, or so that's really all I had as far as an overview goes, and I can probably stop now and take questions. Evan and Matthew, is that kind of what you were looking for? I hope so.
Yeah, Preeta, that was great. Thank you so much. And one of the things that I was noticing as you went through, so the word for you, I guess the familiar word for you is tu in Hindi. Is that right?
Right.
And so what you'll see is these language family trees. So coming out of the subcontinent, because you get that word in, Paula, you get that in Italian as well, right? In Spanish, certainly you get it in Portuguese, right? It makes its way into the Romance languages. You know, the word you in English is a derivative of that as well. So it's interesting how that goes. Preeta, could you talk about, I think it could be interesting to talk about those family words again. What do people call their moms and their dads? What are the words that people would use to address their relatives?
The the most modern families, and I'm guilty of this as well, I'd call my mom mummy, and daddy, which is a vestige of really of colonialism. But if you look at, like, if there are pure Hindi speaking families, they'll probably call their mommy, their mom, ma, or amma. And so it depends, it really depends. Or or like the mom's sister is called ma si, which literally translates to like a mother. So mother's sister is considered like a mother. So the word you use for that would be ma si. Or daddy, I mean, a lot of people call their fathers daddy. I mean, I did. But papa is another one, mama, papa. So the familial relationships, the thing I like about the familial relationships is the words for the familial relationships, that as soon as you hear the word, you know what the relationship is. There's no guessing. Like, for example, in English, if you say uncle, it could be uncle by marriage, it could be uncle by anything. But in Hindi, if I say chacha, I instantly know it's my dad's younger brother. Or if I say tau, it's my dad's older brother. So that's kind of, for me, I like that aspect of it, I guess, but I'm also biased. Yeah, Shahid has his hand up.
Okay, one of the things I wanted to ask you, Pritha, is that the script is very interesting. The script, the Sanskrit script of Hindi language, Hindi script now. And is there any significance? Can you give me some examples as to why those different forms are there, and what do they depict? Do they depict anything? Do they kind of visualize anything? So it's always has been a very interesting observation I have had, but I never ventured into understanding the basis of those different forms and symbols which form the letters and the script.
Yeah, I'm certainly not a linguist, so I'm not sure what the significance of the particular symbols might be. But it does have a basis in the Brahmi script, which goes back several centuries. So it has been something that has evolved over centuries, and kind of adjusted itself to the realities of what modern day India has evolved to today. So I'm not exactly sure if, like, for example, the ha, the way it's written, if it actually signifies anything. But the history of it goes back many centuries before maybe I know. I'm not an expert as far as linguistics goes, but maybe, yeah, I'm not sure what the symbols themselves mean. But yeah, it's kind of like Urdu. For me, Urdu feels like, I don't know how they came up with the symbol for alif and bay, and I don't know. So it's just interesting to me.
Right. Why I was asking, because I see some similarities between the Chinese, have the bars and the crosses. The Thai language has the same kind of a basis. So,
Right. Yeah, that's very interesting. Yeah, yeah, that's a good observation. And like Matthew was observing earlier, even I see some influences even in words like the word for table in Spanish is mesa, and in Hindi and Urdu is maize. So there's so many similarities and borrowing from the family of Indo-European languages that it's really fascinating, to me at least, just to see the connections between those.
This is Kirk Doan. I had a question.
Hi, Kirk.
What does the keyboard on a typewriter look like? How do you do you have a keyboard that's got the 33 consonants, and is that or is it like Chinese where you have a software program that pops up and then you pick the symbol that you want?
Both. So they do have Hindi keyboards, but they tend to be a little bit more complicated. But in more and more these days, what happens is it's more of you type it out in English and it transliterates back to the Hindi script. So it's both really, because and another thing about India is that English is the language of business and education. And Hindi is taught as, and the other regional languages are taught as either a second language or a third language. For instance, I learned Hindi as a second language, but English, I learned it as a first language. Don't ask me why, but that's just how it was. So for me, it's almost anymore, because I've lived away from India for so long, that it's almost easier for me to read the Hindi words in the English and rather than try to read it in the Hindi script, because I've been away for 23 years and it just I've lost touch with it. But to answer your question, they look like both, and the fonts have to be really specific too. Most business in India is not done in Hindi or the regional languages, it's done in English. And most education is conducted in English, which again is one of those legacies of colonialism as well.
Okay, thank you.
Sorry, Evan. I had a brief question. I was just curious. So I took Arabic classes in college, and learning the script was very different from the English, and writing and reading, in a different direction. And I remember, I would be writing in ink and I would be smearing it as I wrote across it on the page. So I was just curious, and forgive me if you've already said this, but the script for Hindi, is it read left to right like in English, or is there a style in particular or anything
it's
like
left
that?
to right like English. It's not Arabic from right to left. So it is left to right. Yeah, so the script is written from left to right, just like in English. But again, to me, it wasn't difficult because you kind of immersed in it since when you were a child. But I tried to learn the Arabic script a few years ago, about 5 years ago. I abandoned that effort as soon as my oldest was born. And it was an adjustment. It was an adjustment going from the opposite direction and also trying to learn. Like Shahid was saying, I don't know what it's hard to understand what the different lines and the symbols and the dots mean.
It looks like we have a question in the chat from Erin. She says, "Hi, Pritha. Thank you for your presentation. Do you have a favorite Hindi word?"
Oh, just one? I don't. I have several. I don't know what to pick really. I'll have to think about that. Like, give me just a couple minutes and let me come back to that.
That sounds good.
Hi, I have a question. I noticed in some of the pronunciation of the words, well, in the transliteration, there was an N at the end of the word. I think like there was one that looked like the English word Maine, but when you said it, it didn't sound like there was an N sound. Could you elaborate on that?
Yeah, so when you transliterate it to English like that, so you kind of have to put that N there, but it's not really like so may, like may, I think, or nahi is what you're talking about. So when you write, in Hindi, when you say it, it's may, it's kind of like a nasal ending to the word, but there's no equivalent in English. So you have to put it like main, right? It looks like main or nahin, but it's not really nahin, it's more like nahi, nahi, like it's coming from your, like the back of your throat there.
So it's kind of like the French nasal N, like at the end. I don't know if you've studied French, but at the end, like if there's an N at the end of the French word, you don't say the N at all. It's
Right. Well, yeah, French has always like frustrated me, probably because it's not phonetic. So no, I have not tried to study French. The languages I tend to gravitate towards are Spanish and Hindi, that languages that I know sound like what they're written. But yeah, that's probably would be a close comparison to that.
Thank you.
To Aaron's question, I think I have a couple answers, Evan. Maybe just because of the way they sound, kalam, which is the word for pen, or kitab, which is the word for book. Those are some of my favorite words, but yeah.
Laura has a question in the chat. She says, how long do you think it would take to learn some level of proficient spoken Hindi? Do you by chance know Western foreigners who have tried to do so?
I do know some people who have tried to learn Hindi, including some Hollywood celebrities. And I believe Julia Roberts speaks some level of Hindi. I was just looking up what celebrity speaks some Hindi. I can't tell you with any level of confidence how long it would take, because I think it's an individual thing as to how each person picks it up, how fast they pick it up. But with Hindi, I feel like because it does borrow from so many other languages, to Brooklyn's point here that those words are Arabic in origin, kalam, kitab, I agree, because with Hindi, there are so many words that are either borrowed from or have a shared history with Arabic or Spanish or other languages. I do feel like it's easier than other, maybe other Indian languages that use the Devanagari script, I mean the Dravidian script like Tamil or Telugu, because those are totally different. So I do feel like, yeah, I do feel like Hindi is fairly easier to learn when compared to some other Indian languages. Are there words that cannot be translated? Yeah, there are, Paula, and this is something that I struggle with at Unbound with my work here. So a lot of our trainings that we do at Unbound use really what I call complicated words that have we have a hard time translating them in Hindi, either because the words don't exist, or when you translate them, they have such a bookish meaning that nobody in everyday, like unless you're a PhD in Hindi, you don't know those words. So one example is we use the form of leadership that we kind of believe at Unbound, where I work, is called gentle, balanced leadership. It sounds simple in English, right? Gentle, balanced leadership. But when you take that and you put that in Hindi, it's like santulit, and there's another word, I can't even remember the word right now. And it's a lot of modern day Hindi is a lot of what I call Hinglish. And so when you try to literally translate word for word everything that the concepts that you're trying to explain in English to Hindi, it doesn't work that way, because they're really, really either hard to um, um, translate, or if you translate, nobody knows what you're talking about, because those are not used in everyday language. They're used by maybe Hindi scholars. Or another example, we've been working on a gender equity workshop at Unbound, and we did there's a module in the workshop that talks between the difference between the concepts of gender and the concept of sex. One is a social construct and the other is a biological construct. But in Hindi, there's only one word for it. There is no separate word for gender or for sex. It's only one word, and it's ling. So when you're trying to explain those concepts in Hindi, it becomes really complicated, because you're trying to struggle to kind of find other words to get to the meaning of what you're saying. So yes, so to answer your question, Paula, yes, there are words that can be translated, but it's done with either a lot of effort or and a funny example I just remembered was a couple of years ago, I was trying to look up what the word surgery was in Hindi. And when I was looking it up, the equivalents I was getting in Hindi were cheerpad, which was tearing up somebody. And I'm like, oh, no. That's not at all what I'm talking about. We're not talking about tearing up somebody's flesh, but there is no equivalent for surgery in Hindi that I could find, at least. And there might be, but that was the closest I could find to that. I was like, okay, this isn't going to work. So.
Well, can I add something to that, Pritha?
Yes, please.
There are quite a few swear words which I cannot speak, which cannot be translated into English. Swear words.
Right. Yeah.
So that is a very interesting, light-hearted kind of a thing.
Yeah, my brother.
There's a soft Swiss word. You know, there's a small phrase called ulukapata. So if you directly translate it into English, it means, you know, son of an owl.
Right.
You know, if you want to call somebody stupid, you call him ulukapata, but it is more severe than just that, son of an owl.
Right. And you know, without using any actual words, my brother pointed out to me the other day that Hindi swear words seem to be really, really incestuous, which is like, oh my God, why are we so, it's that they're so bad. And but yes, you're right. Or like hitting somebody with a chappal, which is footwear, which, unless you know the cultural context to it, using footwear to hit somebody is really disrespectful, because footwear is disrespectful in South Asia, not just in India, but all over South Asia. But it doesn't, like, it was kind of like the incident where somebody threw a shoe at the US president, and people didn't understand why that was such a big deal, but it was a big deal because in those cultures, it is a big deal when you're throwing your footwear at somebody. Yeah, so that's a great example, Shahid.
Let me add one thing, in this connection, is that in India and in the subcontinent, one of the great advancement has been the prose and poetry. Tremendous volumes and beautiful poetry, you know, in Urdu, Hindi, and most of that comes out in the songs and so on and so forth. And many of those concepts which are translated, which you can only understand in Hindi language, it's very difficult to translate those, poems or poetry.
Right, and Urdu poetry especially, like a lot of the Bollywood movies, the songs borrow from Urdu. So Erin asks in a question, she says, what about the other way, words in Hindi that you find challenging to translate in English? I think more than just the challenging to translate in English, to what Shahid was saying, some of the beauty that is in the Hindi or the Urdu gets lost when you translate it into English. So when you listen to some of the old songs in Hindi or Urdu and you translate them in English, I mean, sure, you have a translation, you get the gist of it, but you kind of lose some of that beauty and that essence of the song or the poetry that it's trying to convey. So you might be able to translate it, but you kind of lose some of that essence. I think that goes for any language, though. Yeah. So tenses, Caleb asks, are there a lot of tenses in Hindi not present in English? I don't know the Bukhuzu language, but in Hindi, the tenses are really simple. I don't know the exact equivalence of it, but there is just, well, it's also, let me qualify that. It's simple, but it's also, it can be a little bit confusing because the word for tomorrow and yesterday is the same, kal. Kal is tomorrow and kal is yesterday. But then how you know which kal they're talking about, it depends on the context. Main kal gaya tha means I went there yesterday, or main kal jaunga, which is I will go there tomorrow. But then you don't know by itself, just using the word kal, you don't know whether they're talking about yesterday or tomorrow. The same goes for the word parson, which is the same word used for day before yesterday or the day after tomorrow. Parson could be either one. But you know what you're talking about based on the rest of the context of the sentence. I hope that makes sense, Caleb.
Yeah,
There are a couple of Hindi speakers on here. If they want to jump in and add anything, I would be grateful. Don't be shy. I won't call you out, but you know who you are. Shahid is one of them, but he already outed himself, so.
Pritha, could you talk a little bit more about the language mixing that happens in India? Because I think it's fascinating. And in so many parts of the US, I think we can live in pockets that don't have that experience. But in India, it's a daily occurrence around the country, wherever you are. I would love to hear a little bit more about that.
Yeah, so more and more, because the Indian languages, Hindi and Tamil and Telugu, all of them have such an ancient origin that some of the words that you use on a day-to-day basis either have no equivalent in those languages, or it's just much easier to say the word in English. I'm trying to think of an example. So what I would call, mostly people talk about, when people talk on a day-to-day basis, colloquial Hindi has a lot of English mixed into it. For example, you might say, "Main table pe baitha tha," which means I was sitting at the table, but you know they are using the word table. People are probably not going to say the word maze on a day-to-day basis. They might if they're really, really purists and they are specific about wanting to use that sentence or that word. But there's a lot of mixing that goes on, not just in Hindi, but also in some of the Indian languages. So if you have a keen ear, and Matthew has been to India, you can pretty much follow the gist of the conversation if you're picking up some of the words. You might miss a word here or there.
Just pretend to follow the conversation, Pritha.
Well, you know, you're a special case, but no, I mean, in general, I'm just talking, you could probably pick up the gist of the conversation because there is so much of that language mixing going on in a lot of the Indian languages.
Can I add to that here, Pritha?
Yeah, please.
About that mixing, what the current Hindi and Urdu, very, very close cousins. The background is that it has a lot of mix of Persian, Turkish, and Arabic flavors there.
It does.
And that is due to the history when the invaders from the West came in and ruled in India, the Mughals and all that. And for example, during the Mughal rule in the 14th, 15th century to now, the earlier stages, the official language in India was Persian, actually. Persian. And when they mixed it with Sanskrit and the local dialects, It used to be called a language. It was called a Lashkar language. A Lashkar means an army's language, because those are the invaders ruling India, and they spoke Persian or Turkish, Turco-Persian, and so there has to be a communicative language. So that's why it's called the army's language. And later on, it was called Urdu, and then the original Indian version of Hindi. That's why those are all spoken. But
Right.
one question I have is that you mentioned that there are South Indian languages, that Telugu and Tamil. Is there a heavy kind of similarity in the language and mixture of those languages in Hindi? And that is very interesting, because those were the original languages of the Indian thing, and Hindi doesn't really have an element of those languages.
No, it doesn't. And it's you bring up a really good point, because Dravidian languages, they don't share any history with Sanskrit. They don't share any history with the Indo-European family of languages. They go back way before Hindi ever originated. And like you said, Hindi came as a result of the Persian influence and the Arabic influence. And it originated as sort of a response to these settlements that were happening in what is today is considered northern India. But India was not really even a nation at the time that we're talking about. We're talking about like multiple different kingdoms, 600 different kingdoms that were existing in that subcontinent. And so Tamil particularly is a Dravidian script, which is, to me, is one of the most, it is a difficult language to learn, because it has so many nuances and so many different quirks to the script itself, and has nothing in common with Hindi or Persian or Arabic or anything. So yeah, those were what you would consider the indigenous languages of the southern part of that subcontinent, before it was all conglomerated together in this nation of India. And the interesting thing too is Nepali. I have a friend who's Nepali, and she I can read the Nepali script because it's written in the Devanagari script, but I cannot understand when they're speaking. Maybe I'll pick up a word here or there, but I cannot understand what they're speaking, because the words are very different from Hindi, but the script that is used is the same as the Devanagari script. So the Devanagari script actually evolved in that northern part of India and northeastern part of India and Nepal, that kind of geography, if that makes any sense. And Matthew, to your question, I was kind of on my other computer here looking up another example of a word that would be much easier to say in English. You say somebody, I'm going to the doctor. Main doctor ke paas ja raha hu. If you said that in pure Hindi, you would say chikitsak. But people would probably look at you really weird if you said, main chikitsak ke paas ja raha hu. It'd probably take them a few minutes to even realize what you're saying. But if you said, main doctor ke paas ja raha hu, they know exactly what you're talking about. So those are like kind of one of some of the language mixing that goes on. I don't know how we are on time, Evan.
Yeah, we're getting close to maybe wrapping up. I think we just had one more question there from Jeff in the chat. If maybe we could just touch on real quick and then wrap up.
Yeah, you said English is used in business and schools. Languages evolve over generations. If you look to the future, 3 to 4 generations, I mean, I don't know. English is already very much prominent in India. It's but it's been centuries, and in Hindi hasn't been completely replaced. When a few months ago, I was having a conversation with some coworkers on, colonialism and the effects of colonialism. And one of the things that I feel, and by no means am I excusing British colonialism, let me just put that out there as a disclaimer. But one of the things that I feel like didn't happen in India that maybe happened in some other countries was that the local languages and the local dialects and scripts didn't completely get obliterated like they did in, say, let's say the Philippines. They still exist. I mean, India has a 200-year-old colonial history. It's only India only got independence in 1947, but Hindi is still around, Tamil is still around, Telugu is still around. It's probably going to become more and more where the younger generations don't feel as comfortable speaking in Hindi on a day-to-day basis, or even want to, because English is just more prevalent and available. I don't know, maybe this is just me being optimistic. I don't really see it going away. I hope not, at least in my my lifetime. So yeah, I don't think so, but I'm trying to be hopeful.
Well, yeah, thank you so much, everyone, for joining us for tonight's Lexicon program. We really appreciate your attendance and hope you enjoyed the program as much as I did. Thank you so much to Pritha for giving up your evening to fill us all in on a little bit about Hindi. I certainly learned a lot. And if you enjoyed tonight's program and would like to support future IRC programming, we encourage you to join as a member, make a donation, or download the app. All those links are available in the chat bar. And next week, Wednesday, excuse me, at 7 o'clock, we are doing Thai. So please join us for that, for another round of Lexicon. So again, thank you so much to Pritha, and thank you everybody for joining us tonight.
Thank you, Evan. Thanks, everybody.
Thanks, everyone.